The recovery room on Herath Station had been designed for rest, which it had been providing in the thorough way of a body that has insisted on its own requirements. Lucas had been moving between sleep and waking with the gradual ease of someone who has been significantly unwell, and is now significantly less so, each return to consciousness adding detail to a room that had been assembling itself in his awareness for several days. The ceiling was white. The atmospheric processors produced a sound that was not quite silence. The rotation ring of the station introduced a vibration into everything that was not unpleasant once one stopped noticing it, which Lucas had accomplished sometime around the second day without being aware of it. The return on this particular morning had added a detail that the previous returns had not included. He registered it in stages, the way the mind registers things when it has not yet committed to full wakefulness. Warmth that was not the room's, weight that was not the blankets, the specific quality of being held by someone who has been holding for some time and has settled into it with the ease of continued intention. He did not move. He had learned, in 4 days aboard survey vessels, and 2 years before that in environments where sudden movement carried consequences, that accurate information was worth the patience required to collect it. He lay still and catalogued. The warmth was along his left side. The arm across his chest was pale, white in the particular way that Sarathy's skin was white, which was not the white of absence but of something else entirely, something that caught light differently than human skin did, as though the surface were doing a small amount of work that human surfaces did not bother with. The breathing against his shoulder was even, not asleep, not quite awake, present in the way of someone who had chosen to be here rather than arrived by accident. He stared at the ceiling for a measured interval. The ceiling offered nothing useful, which was consistent with its behavior over the past several days and could not be held against it. He performed the mental process of confirming that he was awake, which he was, and that the room contained what it appeared to contain, which it did, and arrived, by the unhurried route available to a man whose thinking had not yet reached full operational speed, at the conclusion that both of these things were simultaneously and unambiguously true. There was a woman holding him in his recovery bed on Herath Station. He knew who she was. He had seen her once briefly, before the accident, a formal appearance in the station's main corridor, the kind of procession that stops traffic and generates whispered commentary from anyone within viewing distance. She had worn the deep blue of Sarathy formal dress, and had moved with the particular quality of someone accustomed to rooms adjusting themselves around her presence. Her ears long, tapered, the architecture of them elegant in the way that suggested considerable evolutionary thought had gone into the design, had been partially visible beneath her hair. Queen Camilla. He looked at the ceiling again. He was a survey technician. He had 4 days ago failed to adequately respect the warning indicators on a coolant relay, and had subsequently spent those 4 days in a medical facility being treated for radiation exposure, and a fever that his nurse had described, with considerable professional cheer, as impressively stubborn. He had not, at any point during his career, done anything that would reasonably result in waking up in this particular situation. He considered briefly that he might still be feverish. He conducted a small internal audit. He did not feel feverish. He felt, in fact, more coherent than he had in days, which was unfortunate, because coherence meant he could not attribute any of this to delirium and would have to instead attribute it to reality, which was significantly harder to explain. Camilla's breathing shifted, not the shift of waking, the shift of someone already awake acknowledging that the pretense of otherwise had reached its natural end. He felt rather than saw her become more present, the subtle realignment of attention that happens when a person decides to stop being somewhere quietly and begin being somewhere deliberately. He said because something had to be said, and because his higher cognitive functions had apparently decided that this was the contribution they were prepared to make. I want to note, for the record, that I had very little to do with how this morning is arranged. There was a pause. Then, from somewhere near his shoulder, with the measured quality of someone selecting their words from a very large available inventory, "The record has been noted." He stared at the ceiling. Outside the station's reinforced viewports, Herath Roman 4 turned with the slow indifference of a gas giant that had been doing so for 4 billion years, and intended to continue regardless of what was happening in the recovery room. Deva arrived at the 7th hour of the station's morning cycle with breakfast, a medical scanner, and the expression of someone who has been waiting for this particular moment with considerable personal investment. She was Sarathy, which meant her ears registered her mood before her face did. They were angled forward with the specific orientation that Lucas had learned, over several days of observation, indicated active enthusiasm being professionally restrained. She was not restraining it very successfully. She set the breakfast down, ran the scanner along his arm with practiced efficiency, checked the readings with a nod that confirmed everything was proceeding as biology had been instructed to proceed, and then stood at the foot of the bed with the posture of someone who has completed the professional portion of a visit and is now available for the other kind. Camilla had moved to the chair beside the viewport sometime in the interval between Lucas's first waking and Deva's arrival. She was reading a document on a thin Sarathy tablet, the surface of it producing the faint luminescence that Sarathy screens favored, and she held it with the ease of someone who has arranged themselves to appear entirely absorbed while remaining comprehensively aware of everything in the room. Lucas had noticed this. He suspected Deva had also noticed this. "Your fever has been resolved for 18 hours, Deva said, delivering this information with the tone of someone presenting an introduction before the main subject. "Your cellular repair indices are within acceptable range. You will be uncomfortable for several more days, but you are no longer in any medical danger." "That is very good news," Lucas said. "It is," Deva agreed. She paused in the way of someone observing a conversational pause rather than experiencing one. "You had a difficult second night. Your temperature reached a level that concerned the monitoring system considerably." "I don't remember the second night." "No," Deva said, "you would not." She paused again. This pause was longer and contained more structure. Her Majesty was passing through the medical wing during the second night, for diplomatic purposes. The corridor between the medical wing and the diplomatic quarters does pass directly through this section of the station, so it was a natural route. She said this in the way of someone reciting an explanation that has been provided to her and that she has assessed as creative. She stopped when the monitors alarmed. Lucas looked at the viewport. Herath Roman 4 occupied the lower quarter of it, banded in amber and deep rust, moving with the patience of something that has never needed to hurry. "She stopped," he said. "She did," Deva said. "And then she stayed. And then she appeared to make a professional calculation about how much further this sentence should travel. And then it was morning, and then it was the following morning, and now it is this morning, and here we are." She delivered this summary with the satisfaction of a person who has told a story efficiently and knows it. Lucas absorbed this. He looked at Camilla, who had turned a page on her tablet and whose ears had shifted to an angle that suggested she was aware of every word being spoken, and had decided that the correct response was to continue reading. "She stayed," he said, "for 3 days. 2.5, Deva said, with the precision of someone for whom the distinction mattered. "She did leave occasionally. There are, as Her Majesty has pointed out to her staff on several occasions, requirements of governance that do not pause for personal considerations." She said personal considerations in the tone of someone quoting a phrase they found particularly interesting, but she returned each time, fairly promptly. Lucas looked at the ceiling, which continued its policy of offering no useful commentary. "Deva," he said, "I am a survey technician. I calibrate sensor arrays and file geological reports on uninhabited moons. I once wrote a 4,000-word assessment of mineral deposits on a rock that orbits nothing of importance. I would like you to explain to me, using whatever framework seems appropriate, how I have arrived at this particular morning. Deva considered this request with great apparent seriousness. I am a nurse, she said finally. I can explain the fever. The rest of it is somewhat outside my specialization. From the chair by the viewport, without looking up from her tablet, Camilla said, She is being modest. She has a theory. Deva's ears moved with the speed of someone whose private opinions have been accurately identified in public. I have observations, she said carefully. A theory implies more confidence than is professionally appropriate. She told the morning staff, Camilla said, still reading, that the universe occasionally makes arrangements that the people involved are the last to understand. Deva picked up her scanner with the dignity of someone who has decided the visit has reached its natural conclusion. I will return at the 14th hour, she said. Please eat the breakfast. It is calibrated for your recovery and I will know if you don't. She moved toward the door, paused, and added, in a tone that had abandoned professional restraint entirely. It is very good to see you awake, Lucas. It was a long 4 days. Then she left, and the door closed behind her, and the room was quiet again except for the atmospheric processors and the distant, patient turning of the station. The breakfast was good, which Lucas found mildly surprising, and then felt guilty for finding surprising, given that the station operated at a level of sophistication that made his survey vessel look like something assembled from leftover ambitions. He ate slowly, because his body was still conducting negotiations with the concept of appetite, and because eating gave him something to do with his hands while he organized his thoughts into an order that felt manageable. Camilla had set her tablet down. She was looking at the viewport now, at Herath Roman 4 doing what it had always done, and the light from the gas giant's reflected sun gave her skin that particular quality he had noticed the morning before. The way Sarathy white caught and held illumination differently, as though it were having a private conversation with the light that human skin did not participate in. Her ears were still, which he was beginning to understand meant she was thinking rather than reacting, processing something inward rather than responding to something outward. He finished half the breakfast and acknowledged honestly that the other half was beyond his current ambitions. Deva said you spoke to me, he said, while I was under. Camilla did not look away from the viewport immediately. She did so gradually, in the way of someone returning from a considerable distance. Deva speaks with great enthusiasm about many things, she said, which was not a denial. She said you came back each time, after the governance requirements. Governance, Camilla said, has a way of presenting itself as more urgent than it is. I have found that most things which declare themselves immediately necessary are, on examination, capable of waiting 40 minutes. She said this with the tone of someone who has governed long enough to have conducted this examination many times and reached consistent conclusions. Lucas set down the utensil that Sarathy medical design had produced as an approximate solution to the concept of a fork. It was functional and slightly wrong in the way that all alien approximations of familiar objects were slightly wrong, present in shape, but different in some quality that the hand noticed before the eye did. I don't know what you said, he told her, to me, while I wasn't answering. No, she agreed. Are you going to tell me? She considered this with the patience that appeared to be in her, not a practiced quality but a natural one. The patience of someone whose relationship with time had been shaped by years of rooms waiting for her to speak. Some of it, she said, eventually, when it seems like the right kind of conversation to have. What kind of conversation is it? The kind, she said, that benefits from the other person being conscious for the entirety of it. He acknowledged this as reasonable. There was a silence that was not uncomfortable, which he noted because silences with people one has only just met in the technical sense, despite, apparently, having spent 4 days in a state of enforced intimacy with them, had every right to be uncomfortable, and this one had declined the invitation. Can I ask you something? He said. That might be considered impolite. You can ask me anything, Camilla said. I will tell you if it is impolite after you have asked it, which is more useful than telling you before. Your staff, he said. How are they handling this? She looked at him with the specific expression of someone who has found a question more entertaining than they had anticipated. Pet, she said, who is my cultural liaison and a person of great professional seriousness, has described the situation to your colleagues as a Sarathy diplomatic custom involving proximity care for honored guests in medical recovery. She paused. There is no such custom. Lucas stared at her. He invented a custom. He produced one, she said, with considerable speed and structural integrity. I was impressed. He has been with my staff for 9 years, and I believe this represents his finest work. And my crew believed it. Your engineer, the large one with the beard. Orin. Orin, she confirmed, said, and I am told this is an accurate quotation. That tracks, they're always doing things like that, and returned to whatever he had been doing. She watched Lucas absorb this. Your species, she added, has a remarkable willingness to accept explanations that confirm what it already wants to believe. In our defense, Lucas said, we come by it honestly. We've been doing it since before we had spaceflight. The corner of her mouth moved in a way that he was beginning to catalog as the Camilla equivalent of a full smile, a restrained version of the thing itself being apparently held in reserve for circumstances that had earned it more completely. Her ears shifted forward slightly. He had learned enough in 2 days to know that the ears, unlike the mouth, did not practice restraint. He looked at the Sarathy fork approximation in his hand, and then at the queen sitting beside the viewport with the light of a gas giant held in her skin, and thought about the 4 days he could not access, and the conversations that had happened in them without him, and the specific shape of something he could feel the edges of but not yet see the center of. The universe, he said mostly to himself, makes arrangements. So Deva believes, Camilla said. What do you believe? She picked up her tablet again, and her ears held their position, and she said, without looking up, I believe I am still deciding. I will tell you when I have finished. By the 11th hour of the station's morning cycle, the news had completed its circuit of Sarathy Station with the efficiency that only a closed environment can produce. A station was not a city, which meant it had none of a city's capacity for information to become lost in scale. It was instead a precisely bounded community of 412 people, rotating at a fixed orbital distance from a gas giant, with a finite number of corridors and a communication infrastructure that had been designed for operational efficiency and had subsequently been repurposed, as all communication infrastructure eventually is, for the transmission of everything else. Lucas became aware of this when Orin arrived at the 13th hour. Orin was the kind of man who occupied space with the uncomplicated confidence of someone who had never found a room too large for him and had never found a situation too complicated to address directly. He was the chief engineer of the survey vessel and had, on 2 separate occasions, restarted a failing reactor with methods that the manufacturer had not included in the documentation, because the manufacturer had not conceived of them as options. He stepped into the recovery room, assessed its contents with the practiced eye of a man cataloging a situation, and sat in the chair that Deva used during her professional visits with the ease of someone who had decided the chair was available. Camilla had stepped out 40 minutes earlier for what she had described as unavoidable governance, and which Lucas was developing the theory had become somewhat more avoidable in recent days, but was being attended to regardless, out of a respect for the principle of the thing. Orin looked at the chair Camilla had occupied by the viewport. He looked at Lucas. He looked at the chair again. So, he said. Yes, Lucas said. Pet explained it, Orin said, in the tone of someone who has received an explanation and has made a private assessment of it. The proximity custom. Did he? He did. Orin's beard, which was considerable, shifted in a way that suggested the lower portion of his face was doing something that the beard was partially obscuring. I looked it up afterward. on the Sarathy cultural database, the one the station maintains for diplomatic reference. Lucas waited. Couldn't find it, Orin said. No, Lucas agreed. You wouldn't. Orin nodded slowly with the satisfaction of a man whose private assessment has been confirmed. Right, he said. He settled further into the chair. How are you feeling? Better, significantly better than 4 days ago, according to Deva. You looked terrible 4 days ago, Orin said, with the frankness of a man who considers honesty a form of respect. The medics were doing that thing where they keep their voices very calm, which is how you know they are not calm at all. He paused. I told Sira and Davich you'd be fine. Were you confident in that? I was confident it was what needed saying, Orin said, which was a different thing, and he said it in a way that acknowledged the difference. He looked at the viewport at Herath Roman 4, at the particular amber of its upper atmosphere catching the distant sun. She stayed the whole time, he said. We could see the light under your door. Different hours, late ones. Lucas said nothing. I'm not asking anything, Orin said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not here to ask anything. I'm here because you've been unconscious for 4 days and you're my crew, and I wanted to see you awake with my own eyes. He paused. I'm also here because Sira bet Davich that I would ask something within the first 5 minutes, and I have now been here for 6 minutes and asked nothing, which means I have won Sira's side of the bet by proxy, and I want you to know that. I appreciate you telling me. Sira owes Davich 3 credits, Orin continued, because Davich bet that I would last 8 minutes before asking, and Sira bet I wouldn't make 5, and the actual outcome means they've both lost in different ways, which I find more satisfying than either of them winning. He appeared to contemplate this geometry of loss with genuine pleasure. Lucas looked at his engineer and felt something that the past 4 days had not left much room for, the specific warmth of being known by people who have decided, without ceremony, to continue knowing you regardless of circumstances. Commander Orel called the diplomatic office this morning, Orin said, shifting registers in the easy way he shifted everything, from one thing to the next without visible effort. Asked for a routine update on the Queen's schedule. They told him her schedule had been restructured for the remainder of the visit. He apparently sat with that information for quite a while before responding. How long? Pet said he counted to 37 before Orel asked for clarification. Orin's beard shifted again. Pet seemed to feel 37 was a reasonable count. Said anything under 20 would have suggested the commander wasn't taking the information seriously enough. From somewhere down the corridor came the particular sound of the station's rotation ring completing a calibration cycle. A low, resonant pulse that moved through the walls and the floor and the bed frame and everything else. A reminder that the ground beneath them was moving, and had always been moving. That stillness here was a managed condition rather than a natural one. Lucas, Orin said, and his voice had moved to the register it used when the thing being said was the thing that had been waiting to be said. Are you all right? Lucas considered the question with the honesty it deserved. Outside, Herath Roman 4 turned. Inside, the atmospheric processors maintained their steady work. Somewhere on the station, a queen was attending to governance that had become somewhat more negotiable than it used to be. I think, Lucas said, that I am in the process of becoming all right, which is different, but I think it might be better. Orin nodded once, stood, and put his hand briefly on Lucas's shoulder with the weight of someone who means it. Good enough, he said. Then he left and the door closed and the room held its quiet, and Lucas looked at the empty chair by the viewport and waited, without entirely meaning to, for the sound of returning footsteps in the corridor. Camilla returned at the 14th hour, 7 minutes after Deva had completed her afternoon assessment, and declared Lucas's recovery indices so satisfactory that she had used the word remarkable twice in the same sentence, and then written it in his chart as though she wanted it on record. She came in the way she always came in, without announcement, without the procession that her presence outside this room apparently required, with the specific quality of someone who has decided that a particular space operates under different rules than the rest of their life, and has chosen to respect that distinction. She was carrying something. Lucas noticed this before he noticed anything else, because it was unexpected, and unexpected details had a way of arriving first. It was a small container, dark blue, Sarathy in manufacture. The material had that quality of being neither quite metal nor quite ceramic that Sarathy fabrication favored. Something in between that caught light without reflecting it fully. She set it on the table beside his bed, with the care of someone transporting a thing that has significance rather than fragility. "Pet," she said, settling into the viewport chair with the ease of someone returning to a place they have established a relationship with, "has requested that I inform you that he has refined the proximity care explanation to include 3 additional historical references, none of which exist, and that he is prepared to defend all of them to any level of scrutiny your crew applies." Orin looked it up in the cultural database, Lucas said. Camilla's ears moved forward. "I know. Pet is adding it to the database this afternoon, retroactively." She said this in the tone of someone who has assessed an action as technically problematic and professionally extraordinary in equal measure. "He has been in diplomatic service for 9 years. I had not previously understood the full scope of what that had made him capable of." Lucas looked at the blue container. "What is that?" "Sarathy tea," she said. "The station's medical kitchen does not produce it, which I find reflects poorly on the station's medical kitchen. I had it brought from the diplomatic stores." She paused. "Deva told me your appetite has been partial. Sarathy tea is useful for partial appetites. It is also useful for most other things, which is why we drink it continuously, and have done for approximately 800 years. He looked at it. "Is it going to taste like something I have a framework for?" "It is going to taste," she said carefully, "like something you will need 2 cups to have an opinion about." He accepted this as an honest answer, and decided the container could wait until he had confirmed. It was the kind of thing his recovering body would tolerate without strong objection. Outside, Roman 4 had rotated far enough that its largest storm system was now visible at the viewport's edge. A structure the size of a continent, turning with the slow violence of something that had been turning since before humans had stood upright on their particular planet, and had not yet formed an opinion about stopping. Lucas had written geological assessments of moons that orbited gas giants, and understood professionally the scales involved. Understanding them professionally and looking at them through a viewport from a recovery bed, while a queen poured tea from an 800-year-old tradition he was finding different kinds of understanding. "You spoke to me," he said, "for 4 days." "I did," she said. She was pouring the tea now, which involved a Sarathy cup from the same blue material as the container. She had brought those as well, which meant she had planned this, which meant the governance she had been attending to had not entirely occupied her thinking. "What did you say?" She handed him the cup. It was warm in the way that Sarathy materials held warmth, which was evenly and for longer than expected. "On the first night," she said, "I told you the fever was being handled and that you were required to remain alive, which I framed as a request but intended as an instruction." She settled back with her own cup. "On the second day I told you about Sarathy, the parts that don't appear in diplomatic briefings, the long parts." Her ears held their still-thinking position. "I told you about the coast where I grew up, which is cold for most of the year and beautiful for 3 weeks in the late season, and which I have not seen in 4 years because governance does not pause for coastlines." Lucas held the cup and did not drink yet because he was listening, and the listening felt more important than the tea. "On the 3rd day," she said, more quietly, "I ran out of things to report and things to describe, and so I talked about what it is like to be in rooms that rearrange themselves around you. To have people look slightly past you at what you represent rather than at what you are." She considered her cup. "You were a convenient audience. You had no opinions. You could not look past me at anything because you could not look at all. And the fourth day, Lucas asked. She was quiet for a moment that had weight in it. The fourth day, she said, I mostly sat. I had apparently run out of words, which does not happen to me frequently. Pet would find it alarming if he knew. The corner of her mouth moved. I sat and watched the monitors and thought about the fact that a person I had not met was considerably more present to me than most people I have known for years, which I found difficult to explain and did not try to. Lucas drank the tea. It tasted like nothing he had a framework for, and then, about 4 seconds later, like something that had decided to become familiar without asking permission. He took a second sip. 2 cups, he said. At least, she agreed. By the evening cycle, the recovery room had settled into something that was not quite routine, but was adjacent to it. The comfortable territory that forms when 2 people have stopped performing ease and have begun actually experiencing it. The atmospheric processors maintained their steady work. Herath Roman 4 turned outside the viewport with its customary indifference to human and Sarathy affairs alike. Deva had come and gone at the 17th hour with the satisfied efficiency of someone whose patient is progressing exactly as directed, and had left a second container of Sarathy tea on the table with the wordless commentary of a person who notices things and chooses to act on them without making speeches about it. Lucas had been cleared for light activity, which he had interpreted as permission to sit upright without apology, and which represented the full extent of what his ambition could currently support. This felt, after 4 days of horizontal existence, like a significant achievement. He was choosing to treat it as one. Camilla was reading again. She had been reading off and on for most of the afternoon, the tablet balanced with the ease of someone who has read in many circumstances and has long since stopped requiring ideal conditions. Her ears were in the forward position that Lucas had catalogued as engaged, which meant the document was interesting rather than obligatory. And he found he had developed, without planning to, a small and functional literacy in the language her ears conducted independently of everything else she said. He had been thinking about what she had told him, the coast that was cold for most of the year, the rooms that rearranged themselves, the 4th day when she had run out of words and sat anyway. I want to tell you something, he said. She lowered the tablet with the patience of someone who has been expecting a sentence to arrive and has been giving it the time it needed. I write geological reports, he said, for a living. I assess mineral compositions on moons that nobody has named yet, and file documents that approximately 11 people will read, 3 of whom are doing so for procedural reasons rather than interest. My last report was 42 pages on a body of rock that has no atmosphere, no water, and no reasonable future as anything other than a rock. He considered this. I am telling you this because I want you to understand the full context of the person who is about to say something. Camilla set the tablet down entirely. Her ears had shifted to the position he had not seen before, not the forward lean of engagement, not the stillness of deep thought, but something more open than either, an orientation he did not yet have a word for. I don't know what happened in 4 days, he said. I was not available for it, but I can feel the shape of what it produced, and I think that counts for something even without the details. He looked at her. I think Deva's theory is correct. I think the universe made an arrangement and did not consult either of us, which is consistent with how the universe operates, and I find I am not interested in arguing with it. The room was quiet. Herath Roman 4 storm system had rotated fully into view now, the vast slow violence of it filling the lower portion of the viewport with the particular majesty of things that operate beyond the scale of personal concern. That, Camilla said, is the most carefully qualified declaration I have ever received. Her ears were doing the thing they did instead of smiling. I have received formal diplomatic declarations drafted by committees of 12 people over 3 weeks, and they contained less structural hedging. I'm a survey technician, Lucas said. We qualify things, it's a professional habit. "I know," she said. "I find I don't mind it." She was quiet for a moment that felt different from her other silences, less contemplative, more arrived. "I told you on the fourth day that I was mostly sitting. That is not entirely accurate." She looked at the viewport, at the storm system turning in its ancient patient way. "I told you that whatever this was, I intended to find out. I said it quietly because you were asleep and I did not require a response. But I said it." Lucas looked at her. "And now I'm awake." "And now you're awake," she agreed, which changes the nature of the conversation considerably. From somewhere down the corridor came the sound of voices. The evening shift conducting its transitions. The station performing its nightly reorganization with the procedural reliability of a system that has been doing this long enough to do it without thinking. Somewhere in the diplomatic quarters, Pet was almost certainly doing something creative with the cultural database. Somewhere in the engineering section, Orin was winning or losing a bet about something. The station continued its orbit, and the orbit continued its geometry, and the geometry held everything in its appropriate place relative to everything else. Deva appeared in the doorway at the 19th hour with the expression of someone who has timed an arrival and is pleased with the timing. She looked at the two cups, the second tea container, the quality of the room's atmosphere, and conducted a rapid assessment that she summarized by saying nothing at all and simply nodding once, with the satisfaction of a confirmed hypothesis. "Final checks," she said professionally. She ran the scanner, read the results, and made a note in his chart with the specific energy of someone writing something they are pleased to write. "Tomorrow, you may walk the corridor. Supervised and not far and not fast." She looked at Camilla. "The station's rotation ring does the structural work, but his body still needs gravity reintroduction at a pace that respects what it has been through." "I will ensure he is not fast," Camilla said, with the tone of someone accepting a responsibility that they do not find burdensome. Deva looked at Lucas. "How is the tea?" "It tastes like something that decided to become familiar," he said. She nodded again with greater satisfaction. "That is what it does," she said. "That is what most good things do." She collected her scanner, paused at the door, and then said, in the voice she used when she had abandoned professional register entirely, "The universe, in my observation, does not make many arrangements. When it makes one, I think it is worth the attention." Then she left with the completeness of someone who has said the thing they came to say, and the door closed behind her, and the room was theirs again. Lucas looked at Camilla. Camilla looked at Lucas. Outside, Herath Roman 4 turned with its 4-billion-year patience, indifferent and magnificent, holding the station in its gravity the way gravity holds everything, without asking, without explaining, simply by being what it is. "Tomorrow," Lucas said, "I walk the corridor." "Slowly," she said, "you'll be there." It was not quite a question. She picked up her tablet and her ears held their open position, and she said, "I have restructured my schedule. Pet has updated the cultural database accordingly. There is apparently now a Sarathy tradition of accompanying recovering guests on their first supervised walks." She turned a page. "He has given it a name. I will not tell you the name because it is extremely dignified, and I do not want you to laugh at it." "I would not laugh." "You would," she said. "I have spent 5 days learning to read you, and you would laugh." The corner of her mouth moved, and then, for the first time, went further than it had before, past the restrained version and into the thing itself, full and unguarded and present in the way of something that has been held in reserve, and has now decided the circumstances have earned it completely. Lucas looked at her and felt the specific clarity of a person who has woken inside an unexpected situation, gathered accurate information with great patience, and arrived, at last, at the conclusion that the situation is exactly what it appears to be, which is, on this occasion, something worth waking up for. Outside, the storm on Herath Roman 4 turned. The station held its orbit, and the recovery room, which had been designed for rest, had provided it thoroughly and completely, and in the end in more ways than one.